Hello, Internet. We are back, and sometimes it happens. It actually happens a lot that we talk so much here and we really enjoy the conversation. And there's a very good reason why we call this channel Legacy Conversations, not legacy interviews. There's a huge difference between an interview and a conversation. I always think about it as meeting some guy for the first time over a braai. And then, of course, you start talking, you shake their hands and you look the guy in the eye. You're not a shyster or something. And you say, man, where are you from? Who are you? Who's your parents? Let's talk about life. That's the type of thing we like to do at Legacy. Of course, as presenters, we try to speak as little as possible, but we can't help ourselves. We do get involved with a guy across us. And so it happens a lot that we make an episode and then our guest comes back and he says, man, Chris, there was something we forgot to say, man, and it's important. And I always say, man, come back, let's talk. And so we've got somebody here, Paul Danos. We've got him back again. You'll remember him from his first episode. He served in the army, he served in the police, and he's very well known actually as a fighter, as a karate fighter, kickboxer champion, I believe, and so forth. But it's his story, and we're going to talk about several subjects today in English, which I speak deliciously. When I say that, of course, your foreigners who's listening here, that's how us Turkish, the Afrikaner, that's how we used to say we speak English. We speak it deliciously. I know it's wrong. It's just an internal joke. Paul, thank you for coming back, man. I'm glad you're back. I hope your voice is a bit better than last time. You can explain why your voice was a bit croaky. And I see they removed the plaster off your neck. I'm glad about that as well. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Over to you, mate.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Yes, they removed the plaster. What happened was my voice was kind of funny because when they did the surgery, they went in the front here anteriorly and they moved my vocal cords to the side. They put in an artificial disc, and normally the old-fashioned way of doing things was doing a fusion. But I didn't want to do a fusion because you lose mobility. You're restricted in your motion, looking left or right or up and down. So I found a surgeon who was willing to do the artificial disc. Not many in America like to do that. But I think as years go by, more people will do that. In Europe, they've been doing it for 20 years now, the Europeans. But anyway, I'm happy because my recovery is better. And I have to wait another, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks before I can resume like impact training where, and lifting any kind of heavy weights. And for right now, I'm just doing long walks, for cardio, because I got to maintain my cardio. But anyway, the last time I spoke to you there was a lot of things that I missed that I said to myself, man, I should have told Chris this and this. So I'm going to go back in time and tell you why I think our generation and the ones before us, especially when it came to military training, worked well in South Africa. I think the whole system, the infrastructure we had at the time, and the way we got raised by our parents, respect, the discipline, our school system, from local government to the government. I had seen a YouTube video of a gentleman called Chris Moorcroft. I think he was in reconnaissance unit, and he said he was very surprised how in a short period of time you could get guys come out of high school and train them into fighting machines. And they would, they had that professionalism of a professional soldier in a very short period of time. And in all honesty, I don't think it came as a surprise to me because of the way we grew up with a lot of discipline. We played rugby, we played cricket, we had that respect with our teachers. And I think, when we went into the army, we already, we were formed, we were already shaped by the way we grew up, the neighborhoods, our parents, our peers. And, back in those years, we used to look up to our idols who are not like today. The kids have these rappers and musicians or actors. We used to look up to the guys who used to play in the first rugby team, those kind of guys. So what was also remarkable for me when I went into the army, that you got the army was predominantly more Afrikaans run when you talk about the army. With the exception with the Air Force and the Navy, you found more English-speaking people there. And it was incredible. Now you found these English people, they came from Durban, like particularly my unit. I was in SAI, like I told you before, in Uppington. And I don't think these Durban guys had ever gone further than Durban, because they don't, Durban guys never ever traveled. They stayed, they were happy there, you know? So, you know, it was so funny to see these guys that couldn't even walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. And 6 months later, these guys were marching, they were shooting, they were soldiers. And also the two, you know, distinct groups, the English and Afrikaners, sharing the same bungalow. I remember how funny it was, days like Sundays when we had our days off, when we could rest. Then you had the Afrikaners play boere music in the one corner. And the English would play, those years it was like Duran Duran and maybe George Michael, Careless Whisper, those songs, or Samantha Fox. And you have the Afrikaans guy shouting at the one end, "Sorry, cock off," or back and forth, "Hey, Dutchman, put this off." And it was really funny, you know. And these guys eventually, you know, with all the hardships they went through, they managed to get along. They became like brothers. And, you know, we spent 2 years of our lives together. And even to this day, I have a very close bond with those guys that we all, you know, that we went through those hard times with. And I don't even have that kind of bond with friends that I knew my whole life. Like when I had the surgery done recently, everybody that checked on me were all my army guys. They were the ones, like, every day I was getting messages, private message, "How are you doing? How are you feeling? We're thinking about you." So, you know, it was something very special. And it's, you know, and I can tell you this, that I think anybody that goes to the military, I think it's like the university of life. It's the best. It's like having a PhD of life, because the stuff that you're going to do in the army, you're not going to do in Civvy Street. The lessons learned there. You learn about the guy next to you. You learn more about yourself. You learn mentally how strong, how much pressure you can handle. You trust the guy that's next to you, behind you, and you go through so many things together. And I think that's one of the reasons, like when I went through difficult times in my life, I think I have to thank the SADF and later the SAP in my life, because had I not had that, and, you know, going back to my childhood, because obviously I wouldn't be the person I am. It shapes you. And at the time when we were doing, let's say, basic training, a lot of us as soldiers, you know, we thought our instructors were like psycho, crazy, these guys that come from infantry school, the best instructors, you know. And I think there was a reason for all that. Had they not done that, a lot of things could have gone wrong. We could have got killed, because don't forget, we were learning how to kill. You're shooting with real ammunition. Yeah, in the States, the Marines and these other units, they train with something else. They don't even fire live ammunition. And now you're talking about, we had to learn to do fire and movement. And you obviously know that you have different phases of attacks with fire movement. You can do a 2-phase attack where a person goes on a higher ground and he has to fire 3 degrees in front of you with a mag until the objective is reached. And, you know, it was something very responsible, and you had to be careful who on your flanks, and everybody was disciplined. So that took a lot of training. And it's that comes with the discipline. And I think it starts, so I remember when we started our basic training, people don't realize that, but the very most fundamental thing in military training is teaching you how to march. I think if you don't know how to march, it might sound crazy, but it's not, then you cannot learn the other things like basic musketeering, shooting, firing your weapon, and the minor tactics and setting up ambushes and things like that. And you're talking about guys who had no coordination. Within 3 months, everybody was in tune, you know? So those are the things that I think shaped us. And within 6 months, we were like a well-oiled machine. Everybody was fit. You know, the guys had a lot of confidence in their abilities. And we were, you know, we were boys at one stage when we came in, and now we felt like men, professional soldiers. And the camaraderie when I talk to people about it, people don't understand that camaraderie that you have in the military is like second to none. The bond that you have with the guys. I remember the things that we used to do together. You believe it or not, this might sound insane, but I used to love getting an opfolk. I'll tell you why. Because for me, I used to see it in the positive light. I said, the more push-ups I do, the fitter I'm going to get. The guys and the English guys, I'll never forget, they used to bitch. And the Afrikaans guys used to laugh, and they used to say, kyk hoe krak jy souties weer. The English guys were always the ones that were loud and you know, the most of the instructors were Afrikaans speaking, and they used to, hey, soutie, krak jy weer. And it was funny. I used to laugh inside me when I used to hear all the kinds of stuff that used to come out of the guys' mouths when they used to get an oppie. But for me, it was like, I always saw it as something positive, because if you had taken it in a negative way, then you would have felt negative as well. I remember we had this one sergeant who was a PTI. He was a Christian, Sergeant van der Merwe. He was really a nice guy. And when I was a section leader, the captain told him to punish us corporals. And he says, okay, guys, I'm going to give you guys like some bundle sports. You guys are going to compete against each other. You know, he set us up in teams. So we were doing pole PT, we were running, we were doing push-ups, we were running against each other. And when we were finished, it was about 2 hours. He said, look, I just want to let you guys know, I gave you guys the oppie. We said, what? But it was the way that he approached us. He spoke to us very kindly. He didn't shout at us or anything, and he made us believe that we were actually competing, but in fact, he was punishing us. So, and you know, you had different instructors. The vocabulary is something else in the army, as you know. The stuff that you hear there is like actually funny, man. I still remember the words, and you know. But I'll tell you a funny story that happened with us as Rimfastmark when we were doing training there. And I told you before in the previous episode, Rimfastmark reminded me of like a setting where you'd have a cowboy movie, the cactus and, you know, the dry riverbeds and everything. So one night, like at midnight, I don't know what phase it was where we were doing training. My buddy Skuman and I, we always did some bad things together. We decided to go and steal food. We were hungry by the tents, you know, where the chef slept. And we were all sleeping in bivvies, 2-man bivvies, because we weren't getting enough food, you know, during that training phase. So we went to the tent where the chef was sleeping, and we started stealing bully beef. And we put the bully beef here about our t-shirt. And I don't know if you had this experience, but most army guys can tell you that at night, you don't see the tent cables. A lot of guys used to trip over the tent cables. And so we come with about 4 or 5 of us. We come out of the tent now. We want to scramble back to our bivvies. We want to eat our sweet corn and bully beef. And one of the guys, he trips over the cable, and the whole flipping tent comes down, and the pots and the pans go, and there's a lot of noise. And you can imagine midnight in the middle of nowhere, noise travels at night. Yes, and the captain gets up and he's like, "Wat the donor gaan aan?" And Sergeant van der Merwe wakes up, and so the guy had tripped. He stayed there. He got hurt, right? And we're laughing ourselves sick now. And we hear the captain is the Murin and everything. So anyway, he said to the guy, I can't remember which rifleman was. He says, if you don't tell me who were the guys who your accomplices are, you're not going to get your pass, because we were supposed to go like 2 weeks later, like on a 14-day pass. So, you know, the guy gave up our names and everything. So the next day, the captain, you know, he says 3 on Charlie Company. So we 3 on and that. And it's like 35 degrees Celsius, very hot. And it's Sunday. And if I'm not mistaken, on a Sunday, you're not supposed to get an oppie on a Sunday. So he calls out Charlie Company, and he calls out my name. He says Danos, he says Schoolman, he says everybody, and he puts this big, massive table with tablecloth there. And he puts bully beef, sweet corn, and Kool-Aid. So he has us seated at the table, and he goes to Charlie Company. He says, "Manne, hierdie ouens het besluit om julle," I'm not going to use the word on the internet, but with the N word, you know, and julle gaan op en af riem vasmaak op hardloop. And he's standing behind us, and the chef brings us bully beef, right? And he says, "Get bliksems, get." Now, of course, I tell you something, I got so sick. The bully beef that I've never eaten so much bully beef, even to this day. When I go in, what do you call it, in the grocery store here in America, and I see, they call it corned beef hash. I look the other way. I don't even want to see it. I had that aftertaste of bully beef and sweet corn in my throat here and my chest. So anyway, the boys are running, right? They're running up and down, and you can hear, "Hulle ouma se dit, hulle pa se dit." The guys are cursing us, right? Because they had to run, and I tell you, it was high. I can't remember the height of Rimfast Markop. And they had to stand there, and the captain would stand there with his binoculars. There's no way you could count the company, how many guys were lined up there. And then these guys had to come up and down. But the worst was we had to drink like gallons of Kool-Aid, eat bully beef and sweet corn. It was crazy. But, you know, those kind of things you always remember. You in the army, you always think about, okay, you go through this hard training, but there was also the funny moments. There was a lot of funny moments, you know, despite the hardships. And there were, you know, I think there was the unwritten rule in the army that during training, a certain percentage of people, there's a possibility that people could get killed because you were dealing with live ammunition. And there were some very sadistic instructors. I remember there was an incident in SAI many years ago where this guy, he was dehydrated and he needed water, and he didn't get the water, and he eventually died. But I had a very bad incident with a sergeant during my section leaders course. We eventually became friends. I put it behind me. We were doing signal training that particular day. And I handed in the radio, and there where the frequency button is, there was a bit of dust. And I was catching a kind of cold because at night it used to get cold, and then during the day it was hot, you know, and I was like sniffing. And the sergeant says to me, Sergeant Murray, he was like a really, really badass guy, right? He says to me, "Het jy nie gesien die ding is vol stof nie?" And at that very moment I went like this, and he says to me, "Sug jy vir my?" And he gets up close and he hits me, but I've never been eaten so hard. He hit me with a flat hand against the ear. I just dropped the radio, and I remember, I'll never forget, there was a guy from reconnaissance regiment. They were doing the mortar course, and he happened to be in the room when I was handing the radio, and he said to him, Hoekom moes jy dit doen? Hoekom moes jy hom so hard slaan? So anyway, I went back to my tent, you know, and I sat there, and I was like, but I was crying out of frustration because for the first time in my life, somebody hit me and didn't hit back. And my father always taught me, you know what? You should never be somebody's punching bag. But I also realized if I had punched Sergeant Murray that day, or I had hit him if I retaliated, I would have had problems. I'd probably end up in DB, and I would have been thrown off the course. I had to keep my, my composure. And I had a lot of anger built up. And I said to myself, shit, if this guy comes to the border, I'm going to take him out. There was a thing. I had heard stories. I don't know how true it was. In Vietnam, it used to happen where soldiers, they called it, the Americans called it fragging, an officer or NCO. But you know how time goes by, you tend to forget. Time heals. And I put that past. And funny story is, at one moment, he became our company sergeant major on the border. And he sees me and he's like, Danos, kom hier. Kom drink bietjie saam met my. So we got drunk together one night. And I took a round, but it's not the round that I had said I was going to shoot him with. From my R4, right? I go to him, Murray. I said to him just like this. He was a sergeant, right? And I said to him, this is for you. He said, what do you mean? I said, you don't remember, do you? So when I told him the story, he started crying, actually, and he took out the Bible and started asking me for forgiveness, and which I did. because you know what, a person shouldn't hold grudges. Those things happen, and even after border duty, him and I connected really well. And I'm sure you know a lot of guys in other units went through something similar. I think for the most part, the instructors cared for us. The guys, our training instructors who came from Oudtshoorn or the PFs, and the reason they were hard on us, of course, is because you know what, it was a real man's world, and your life depended on it. There was no room for mistakes. It wasn't something that you could, it was the real deal. So a little mistake, if you slipped up, you could have your buddy killed or yourself killed, and that would have been a big problem. But for the most part, you know, I enjoyed the army, and one of the things, you know, of course, that I wanted to tell you is today's generation, right? I remember on Sundays when we used to rest, we used to do our washing. We used to write letters back home. Either you're writing to your girlfriend or to your family, your mom or your dad. You used to take that pen, right? And it had so much meaning writing that letter. It's not like today you have the internet and you type and you text. That had so much meaning. And during the week, I can't remember what day it was, we'd get mail and we had to do push-ups for our mail. And, you know, guys were always excited. They get a pucky and chocolates, condensed milk, or a letter from their girlfriend, and you had to do all these push-ups, and it was well worth it. And I remember you read your letter, right? And you would read it sometimes 10 times. You would make sure that everything sinked in that you read, and you wouldn't throw that letter away. You'd put it in your trommel. And sometime during the week, just to inspire you again, you'd read the letter and you knew that somebody was waiting for you at home, whether it was a girlfriend, your mom, or your dad. But also, of course, remember, you've probably heard of the term, I don't know, I didn't see that in the police though, but in the army, the Johnny letters. The guys used to get Johnny letters, you know, fuck. And then they used to go crazy. Oh, she left me and that. Luckily for me, I didn't get any of that because I didn't have a relationship when I met a girl actually on my second pass. So when I went in, I didn't have a girlfriend, but for the guys who did, it was really tough, you know. They took that with them. But, you know, those experiences that we had, it was unbelievable. If you tell somebody that hasn't done military training or that, they will never understand. You know, so.
You know, it's a really good thing you talk about these things. And then what struck me most is I think you're saying to me that it's your choice whether you carry a grudge or not. Because I speak to a lot of veterans, and there's a lot of them who's angry, man. They're really angry about a lot of things. So this idea of deliberately saying, I'm not going to go that route of taking revenge, is that something to do with your fighting, your martial arts background, or is it just the man? How did you get to that?
Yes, Chris. Yeah, Chris. No, I agree. I think it has to do with my martial arts, but it's also me as my personality. You know, I could have an argument with somebody, and 5 minutes later, I forget about it. Because you know what? I've always thought, you know, if you hold something in your heart, you're always gonna be a prisoner to yourself. You know, and martial arts teaches, you know, although there's violence. I remember I used to do boxing and kickboxing and that. I never, believe it or not, I don't like violence. When I see people fighting, if there was a fight broke out, I would be the first guy to stop it. Nowadays, let me tell you what happens, especially in America, in schools, a fight breaks out and all these kids take out their cameras and they start recording. Nobody tries to stop. And I think personally, those people are cowards because they don't have the guts to go and stop the fight. If you know, then they put this on social media. We had on the news about 2 weeks or a week ago, a girl somewhere got bullied in school and she got beaten up, and the video went viral on social media, and she saw it, and this poor girl, she committed suicide because she was so embarrassed that she got beaten up. I have a student in my class now. She's about 18, I think. She goes to university, and she was going on Instagram a lot. and she was seeing girls that were skinny, and you know, on Instagram, the girls can touch up, make themselves look nicer with filters and everything. And she started putting her finger in her mouth to throw up the food that she was eating, and she got really skinny, and she looked sick, and she looked pale, and she's a very good and everything. But I started seeing that she got weaker with shots and techniques and everything. I told her mom, I said, listen, I think your daughter, she's putting her finger, I think there's a name for it. I can't remember the word for it, but she started putting her finger in her mouth and throwing up. And her mom said, no, I don't think she would do it. And then her mom called me one day and she said, yeah, it's true. It's true. And today's children have so much, what you call pressure, especially with this flippant social media, I think has destroyed people. And you've seen what it's done for political parties and this and that, how people can manipulate it for the wrong reasons. I'm glad, Chris, that in our time, we didn't have this. You know, like we didn't have cell phones, and look, we still managed. We got around. And yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah, I think you call it bulimia or something. If I
yes,
say
that's the word.
It's a disease. I mean, because you see it often. I mean, you look at people taking selfies absolutely everywhere. And they're always on their phones, and they're always not appreciating nature or anything. We see it a lot here in Phuket, you know, the young girls arrive, and then they would pose there like a professional model in the waves, and they're like this, and they're in their own world. My problem with that is what happens with that child or young person when he starts getting the negative comments and negative remarks, which will come because there's a lot of trolls. And then I suppose you work with a lot of young people in your dojo, in your club.
Yes, Chris. And you know what? And I'm going to emphasize this, and I think you can agree with me, and the listeners are going to agree with me too. Everything starts from home. If your foundation at home is not good, you know, it's listen, there's a lot of peer pressure in schools, and everybody wants to be cool. Everybody wants to be like a rapper. You know, I told my students, right? Try to be different. Try to be yourself, and don't follow anyone. Let people follow you. You know, like so their role models that they have are all the wrong people. Like I said to you before, early on in the conversation, for us, our role models are the guys who play in the first team rugby, or, you know, a school teacher. Even a school teacher used to be a role model for me. There were a lot of school teachers, people that influenced me, helped me in my life. They were very important because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be the person I am today. It wasn't somebody who was singing or anything like that, you know?
This reminds me, right in the beginning, you mentioned Chris Moorcroft. Now, of course, he was the Sergeant Major of Special Forces. Fantastic man. I'm still trying to get hold of him to come onto Legacy because he's got this wonderful story. People from the paratroopers talk about him with awe. They say this guy just couldn't stop. He was like supremely fit. He was so fit that, you know, they didn't think he was human. But what's funny to me is we had two other Special Forces members on here who are supporting what you're saying now. RSM James Tytger. The one and only RSM James Tytger. And then my friend, Sergeant Major, what Skulk Forrie, SP Forrie, was Bukwe Road. And both of them said to me, and it's your own legacy, if you go back in the episodes, you can remember, you can see it. Both of them said, if you have a soldier coming into the army with problems,
I've seen them quit.
Yeah, it's not the army's fault. Something happened to that young man as a child or at home, which brings me back to the parents. Now, we know these days that there's a lot of broken homes. It's a sad thing in life. Can you see the difference of when a broken child gets to you for training, how he or she progresses, just to have this little bit of discipline? And discipline, of course, can be negative as well. I mean, there is negative reinforcement, which is not always a good thing. It's sometimes really it is. You know, we're talking like wimps now, probably the gray hair coming out. But do you see a difference?
Yeah, Chris, look, it's very predominant in today's world that back in our time, most people were, you had the mother stay at home. She was a housewife. She cooked, and she was always waiting for the kids to come home and make sure they ate and ask you if you did your homework and this and that. And today, yeah, especially in America, I can't talk for South Africa anymore. There's a lot of single moms, and it's tough for them because, and especially today's economy, things have become really hard. And the mother is a working mother. The kid comes home. Like I said to you, he doesn't know what to do. He gets influenced by either friends or social media. The mother's not there to see everything that they do. But I come across those kids, and at the same time, I work with very rich people's kids. And they are the worst, to be honest with you, because they get given everything. So I'm going to tell you a story now, what happened to me with a lot of these kids. So where I had my dojo before, there's a big window. I can see when they come from the parking lot. Now, when I used to do karate, when I went to the dojo, I came in very strong. I bowed, I said us to my sensei, and was very militaristic kind of atmosphere. Now I see these kids, they walk in towards the front door, and I see they're yawning. They're yawning, and they walk in like they're 100 years old. And I'm like, what is wrong with them? So they come in, and they got a very slap khat hodang, right? So they're not very smart because they haven't caught on to how I think about them. So I said, okay, I let them bow in, and I make them run laps and laps, and I make them do push-ups. And they still can't figure out why I do that to them. And I do that because the way they walked in. And I said, have you guys ever seen the way you walk in here? And they said, what do you mean? I say, you're yawning, you're tired. And of course, I was like, and I'm sure the same with you and all these other guys that you had on Legacy. Man, we were like Duracell batteries. I remember my mother used to fight 10 o'clock at night to get me back in the house, because you came home, you did your homework, and you played outside. You climbed a tree, you got the old-fashioned ketty, and you'd be shooting things and play like you say in Afrikaans, and you used to wrestle with your friends, what have you. These kids are, man, they're like, by 5 o'clock, they're already tired. They have nothing. And again, going back to some of the things we spoke about, they have zero social skills. When I was a young man growing up, I could converse with an adult, could have a conversation. You talk to these kids, they're like zombies. They don't know nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can't even, it's like, they're like, huh? They look at you. They're like in a flatty, complete flat spin. I'm like, wow. And I'm thinking, like parents who have daughters, going to marry a boy like that one day. What kind of a man is he going to be? I have some students that go to university, right? They're like 20 years old. Some of my private students. You believe, Quest? One day, one of the guy's battery had died, and I pulled my car next to him, and I said to him, "Open the hood." He didn't know what button to press for that. So I showed him. I went in his car, and then he didn't know how to connect the battery with positive and negative. And just those basic things that we learned as kids in South Africa. They don't even know how to change a tire. I promise you. And I think it's also a South African thing, because we grew up with those skills back home. And yeah, you're going to find that in America too, with children who come from the little town America, small town America, like Iowa, not the big cities. They more or less like the South Africans, they're tough. They grow up, as you know, back in the old South Africa, we were all mechanics. We knew something about a car. The car broke down. We learned quickly how to fix the car.
Well, statistics will tell you that 90% of US Special Forces comes from the rural areas. Yeah. So they were huntsmen, as I think they call themselves. They typical like us. I mean, I remember taking a pellet gun and disappearing into the bush. My parents were never worried about it. They wouldn't even know I'm gone, man. They would actually get obnoxious if I'm at the house all the time. I said, what are you doing here? Die nie maatjies nie, gaan speel iewers. So you take your duckwill fiets. I don't know how to translate that into English, but it was, I don't know. You have this real post office type of bicycles without gears or anything and a back brake. And then you go down those dust roads and you see who can make the longest skid marks as you brake. That's the type of thing. And half of the time you fall off. And there's no problem with that. And if you misbehave, it's quite possible that die tannie oor kan die huis jou sommer 'n klap teen die kop sal gee. Nobody worried about that type of thing. It wasn't bullying. It was normal kids, I would say. What I find disturbing these days is I've got this new computer now. I call it the Beast. Because my old laptop, I burned it out on legacy. I burned it out completely. It's a long story. But we bought a new one now, which is a desktop, which I only use for editing, and it's required. And part of this computer is that because it's a gaming computer, it's a very powerful thing, liquid cooled, everything. I don't play games on computers. I don't. But it had a game on it, one of these shooter games. And I thought to myself, okay, well, last time I played one of these games was Duke Nukem, which betrays my age. I mean, this is back in 97 about. And for me, it was just fun. I'm not so sure those games are good for people, to be honest. I mean, they're extremely realistic. And if you look at the views, some guy would post a game on YouTube, which he played, and he gets 30, 40, 50,000 views on it. And that scares me, actually, because I'm not sure that child is actually capable, even young people are actually capable to understand that this is not real life. I mean, you only have to shoot with an R4 or R1 once in your life to realize that thing kicks, it turns in your hand, you really have to hold it, and you have to move, and it's heavy. It's not a damn mouse which you just click. And that reminds me of a report I read that because of electric windows, it seems that youngsters start coming into the army and they were weaker physically than the guys from our age. And then General McGill Alexander came here on the show, the paratrooper general, and he made a statement and he said, well, in the 1990s and later it came out that the black kids joining the paratroopers could make the selection quite easily because they were physically tougher. The whites has gone fat, if I may use that word. Now, how do you deal with that as an instructor? Because you want to win. I mean, I will not tell myself that a man like you does not want to win. I mean, you want to win at any cost. Am I correct in saying that? And then you want to move it over to your student.
Yeah, Quest, listen, I have my old South African mentality in me, and I won't change. I'm old school. I'll tell you a story. One of the moms called me one day, and she said, Sensei, my son is complaining. It's not fun in karate anymore. She says to me, you make him do push-ups because the kid was misbehaving. The lady's from Israel, her name's Dana, very nice lady. I said, Dana, you have to realize I'm teaching your son life skills. I'm teaching him how to defend himself. And this is not ping pong. It's not table tennis. I said, there's a real world out there, and you see so many cases of kids getting bullied and that. And I said, you know what? You're in a fortunate situation that you have your kid in a private school. Had he been in a public school, he would have been more exposed to getting bullied. And it's not only that. You obviously, people around the world, especially South Africa and the rest of the world, have seen in America we have a lot of gun violence here. And of course, it goes back to the discipline. Let me ask you something. We South Africans, my generation, the previous one, and maybe one just after us, we all knew how to handle a weapon. But you see any of us going and shooting up our friends? No. Because you know what? Our foundation was good and discipline. And with the kids in my class, I punish them. And I don't care, at this stage, after, we went through COVID and that. Before COVID, I used to have more students. And then people started getting scared, sending their kids, people were scared to come to the gym. And, I learned one thing, you obviously know this too, growing up in South Africa. We used to play outside in the dirt and we were exposed to germs, and being exposed to germs and that makes you stronger, your immune system stronger. But I don't want to talk on the COVID issue because I can get crazy with that stuff. So anyway, less people started coming, and I'm very happy to teach a small group of kids who really want to be there. I'm not going to be there and, hey, Johnny, be quiet. Hey, Johnny, don't do this. I'm not a babysitter. And I belong to an organization based in Japan that's 2 million strong. We teach good quality karate. Besides that, I also teach kickboxing. I teach men's and women's self-defense. I give them a crash course on how to defend themselves with like realistic fighting. But as far as discipline, man, I have parents who support me. I have some good parents who support me when I discipline their kids, you know, but for the most part, the kids are very neglected here too. The mother, like I said to you, you have single moms, they're tired. They come from a long day at work. They either work as a bank teller, and they have also, you know, their own personal problems, and everything's, so here's the thing we have in America. I don't know how South Africa is, but everything in the United States is instant gratification, instant food, instant this, instant that. So nobody you know, goes through the process. It's a process. You want to become the best in American football or baseball or martial arts. It's not going to happen unless you put the time and the sweat in it. But over here, a lot of these people want to be the best, but they don't want to work. They want to wear the T-shirt, you know, but nobody wants to put in the hard work. You know, I tell a lot of, I had guys come up to me back in the day when I used to work in an MMA school, a well-known MMA school called American Top Team. And I used to train the striking aspect. And I saw a lot of talented guys come in, but they didn't have the work ethic. And I can spot talent from a mile away. But in my case, I look at myself, I wasn't the most talented, but I was the hardest worker. I had that thing in my mind, you know what? After training, I need to train more and train more. And sometimes I used to actually overtrain and get hurt. But I see that even in life, people don't have that focus. I look at example, for example, I look at the guy that I work for. He's a multimillionaire. And he said to me that he had a lot of failures in his life to get where he is. And if you look at all the successful people, they failed. Nobody got everything the right away, you know? And I think if you don't fail, you don't get better. If I lost a fight, I remember if I lost a fight, I would question myself, but why did you lose? Weren't you physically prepared, mentally prepared, whatever it is? You learn from those mistakes and those failures. And it's not, but yeah, what happens in America, I talk for America because I don't know what's happening in the rest of the world. Once people fail, they get cold feet and they give up. They just give up. And there's one thing that I hate the most, if you want to get on my bad side, is somebody who quits. Man, if you want to piss me off, quit. I hate people who quit. I don't know. There's something about me. I just hate to see someone quit.
I have seen you. There's a video which you sent me, and I would like to add it here because I want to speak about it. Were you in some kind of contest and you floor the guy within, I think, 3 seconds? They say 5 seconds, but that's closer to 2 seconds, to be honest. And it seemed to me you just stepped forward and you hit him very calculated. And that's what I want to ask you now. Because last time we spoke, I did ask about the killer instinct. We were talking about boxing or something. But anyway, when you're in a ring, when you step out, when you start fighting in any circumstances, is it ever with rage? Or is it totally calculated, or is it instinct, or all of those?
So of course, no, I wouldn't. Rage, no, because if you have rage, you can't think, and that's where you start making mistakes. So I think it's mostly instinct and drilling. And I'm going to tell you something surprising, and you're going to be surprised me. I'm a very scared person. My whole life, I was scared. I was when I was a youngster growing up, I was bullied. First of all, I had a problem in South Africa growing up as a kid. When I came from Greece, I got picked on, either sometimes by the English speaking or the Afrikaans. But for the most part, the Afrikaners were my best friends, and the English were the ones who made derogatory terms. They used to call me Porra. I wasn't even Portuguese, you know. But I never kept that, you know. And so I had to learn to fight. And I did a lot of things in my life, believe it or not. I took on a lot of things because I had fear. And I think fear sometimes can be your best friend, because you have to learn how to deal with it. You know, I was telling my students one day, one of my students was telling me they were scared to compete in a tournament. They start getting the jitters and they get the shakes, and you know, they haven't got a lot of experience. And I said to them, listen, if you want to see somebody that's scared, it's me, They say, Sensei, but you were a world champion kickboxer, you this. We've seen you jump out of airplanes. I said, you know what? I'm going to surprise you guys. I said, I did all of that stuff because I was scared. And they were like, wow. And that's the honest truth. And even when I was doing like professional kickboxing, even karate events, you always, I would say, you think about the unknown. You're afraid of the unknown. And I don't care, a guy can be a special forces operator, whatever. When you're going into an unknown environment, you have to have some fear. If you don't have fear, you're stupid. And the only way to deal with that is facing your fears. I remember in school, they would give us a project to do, and you had to come and stand in front of the class. And I was telling my friends, man, I don't know how to do this. I'm not good in public speaking and that. He says to me, he gave me a tip. He says, when you talk in the classroom, look over everybody's heads, find a place in the back of the classroom, like a spot, and look at that spot and just look over everybody. And I did that, you know. And the more you do something, whether it's fighting or you skydiving or you're doing house penetration, you become good at it and you get your, you know, your confidence in what you do. But I'm going to be very honest with you. I was always a fearful person, and I got into a lot of fights. I won a lot of fights, whether it was in the street and that. But to tell you the truth, I can't tell you that I was not scared. I was always scared, because it's not the scared that you're going to run away, but it's that unknown. But I stood there, you know, balls to the wall, and I fought. And you know, you've probably heard of fight or flight. So I decided to fight.
That is part of a policeman nature, isn't it? I'm trying to convey to people here that the difference between a horseman, that's what we call the civilian person who's not in the police. I asked my old commander once, why do we call these people horsemen? And he says, have you ever seen a hair in the headlights of a bakkie? He's just looking like you like this. You can walk up and kick it to death if you want to. He says, same story. Go and look at the crime scene. You see these horsemen look at you like this. You know, because they need somebody to take leadership there, and I don't blame them. I'm just saying. The difference between a horseman and a policeman is when there's a crime or an incident or even a terrorist incident, the police will run towards that crime incident and the terrorist and try and sort it out. He's not going to run the other way like a horseman would do. And that, I suppose, is the difference between the two. Of course, you get the wankers. I'm not impressed with the US police. I don't think you are either. I'm especially not impressed with the SWAT teams. Waiting outside the gay bar in, where was it, Orlando, for 6-7 hours while some mobber is shooting, you know, people inside. Man, it's inconceivable. I mean, you were in the reaction force. And I think you'll agree with me when I say there is no way that the South African police force would wait outside. They would have gone in and made an end within seconds. There's not even a story about it. That's your duty, man. That's your object. That's what you'll do. No one even needs to give you instruction to do it. You would have gone in and done it. And I was very, very harsh with him, and people criticized me. But now I've got a fascinating question for you. You were a kickboxer. You were a karate thing. Is it possible for you to fight in a pure way? And by which I mean is not mixing these different arts, martial arts together automatically. Or will you always combine them and then become something which the other guy can't really figure out because you have a different style here which he hasn't encountered yet?
Yeah, so Chris, to answer your question, right? So when it comes to a real fight, my goal, and this is what I teach my clients to, is not to stand there and have a boxing match with the assailant, the aggressor. It's try to end the fight as fast as you can. And when I say that, I mean in seconds. I don't want to stand there and have a boxing match where it goes more than 2 minutes or that. I want to do the maximum damage in the minimum amount of time. And, you know, I've always had a philosophy, hit first, hit hard. So I'm going to explain on that. I'm going to expand on that. As you can always tell when somebody is aggressive and you know that at any given point he's going to attempt to hit you. So I don't know if you remember very well in South Africa, guys used to walk up to you. They used to come very close, and the next thing you knew, they used to headbutt you. That was very common in South Africa. They do that, I know, in the UK too, in Scotland and those countries. I think there's something called the Glasgow kiss in Scotland, where what they do is they headbutt you or something, and they pull the shirt over your head, something like that. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I remember when guys used to get very, very close to me, I would whack them, and I would do a good job. I'd make sure that I hit them so hard that they didn't have a fighting chance. And yeah, in Miami, for many years, I worked in doors at clubs, like nightclubs, security. And you know, you get, I did it in South Africa too, and you get guys are drunk and they want to impress their girlfriends, and it typically starts off by them trying to push you. They start putting hands on you. And when somebody put their hand on me, that's when I reacted. There was no time, there's none of that Steven Seagal stuff and all of that stuff. It doesn't work. You got to hit hard, and you have to be effective in what you're going to do. Like I said, I don't want this to turn into a boxing match. But, you know, I always try verbally to diffuse the situation. I don't believe right away, okay, but there's some guys, they just don't understand when you talk to them. They don't, you try to calm them down, you try to be, you know, they just go on. And I think that the alcohol in their system takes over, and everybody's a Rambo. And especially in America, let me tell you something, in South Africa, back in the day, you know, South Africans, we love to fight. For those years, I don't know how, it's probably more violent now. Guys probably shoot now with guns. Back in my time, nobody used to pull out a gun and shoot you. It was, they used to blitzen you. I remember I'm sitting at a bar in Pretoria one day, and I'm sitting with my friend. You probably heard of him. A very nice guy. He became a WBO boxing contender for, I think it was lightweight. His name is Ignatius Schippers. He trained with Harold Forbach. Him and I were friends because I'm going to tell you, I had a cornerman's license. I was actually involved with professional boxing too. So we're sitting at the bar, and Nas never used to drink, you know, orange juice, maybe water. Now I'm having some beers. Some guy, I'm staring in the distance. I was tired. I'm staring in this guy's direction, but I wasn't looking at him. He walks up to me. He says, "What a fuck cake, yeah? Cake on me, huh?" And the next thing I knew, he was very aggressive, and I took the beer bottle and I smashed it on his head. I took the bar stool and I was choking him with it. But that's how South Africans were. And over here in America, it's more talk. South Africans will blitzen, they'll fight. South Africans are not afraid to fight. But Americans, it's always talk, and it's big talk. And the more the talk, I used to like to club them, because them is just talk. South Africans would, boom, get into it. But going back to Nas, I want to tell you a funny story. We were in the same, it was like a restaurant, a kind of club thing. And we were hanging out while I was working. I don't know if you remember, you've probably heard of him. There's a boxing coach in the SAP called Wamheni. What is Wamheni's last name? Henny, I'm trying to think of his last name. But him and I we used to get all these guys from the SAP. Like, I'm going to tell you a funny story that happened with me with Wamheni. Do you remember, probably heard of the Van Winkle brothers? They were Springboks boxing. They used to come to our gym. Henny de Beer, that's it. Now I remember Henny's name. So I was with Nas in this very same place in Pretoria in Sunnyside, and I was sitting and drinking. He was listening to music. We had just finished training. We were training at the Harlequins. I don't know if you remember the old Harlequins. There was a rugby field there, and we had a boxing gym there. It was called HPP. So it was Henny, Paul, and Peter. Peter was my uncle, the mafia guy. So it was the boxing gym name was HPP. So I'm sitting there with Nas, and this guy comes with entourage of people. And Nas was a small guy. He's not a big guy. He looks, if you see Nas, he looks like he had that, like they say in Afrikaans, blasspel, like a Mexican. Good looking guy. He looked more Spanish than Afrikaans or English. And very, very relaxed guy. We're sitting there, and this guy was from the former Yugoslavia. And he came in there with chains. They had just gone, had this civil war, and a lot of them had immigrated to South Africa, Bosnians and Serbs, what have you. And he had made claims that he was a kickboxer and this and this and that. And he heard that Nas was a boxer, and he started messing with him. And I wanted to fight for Nas's part. And Nas says, no, don't worry about this guy. Let's leave these people alone. And this guy had about 5 people with him and some girls and this and that. So Nas says to me, I think we should leave because I think we're going to have problems. So we decide to leave. We go down the stairs. And when we go downstairs, these guys were waiting for us. And Quest, I tell you something, it was like watching a Bruce Lee movie. That's where I got convinced that size doesn't matter. And this guy, I don't know, he came forward, and the next thing I saw a blur of hands. I didn't even see Nas's hand. And the guy hit the floor, and I was laughing so loud. His friends ran away, and I said, shit, my buddy Nas can throw a punch. And at that time, Harold Volbrach had a boxer, you must know him. He became a world champion called Philip Holliday. Okay? And Henny wanted us to get Nas to fight Philip Holliday. They were in the same weight division. But Harold, I don't know if you know, the boxing the boxing game is very crooked. So when they bring up a boxer, I learned this, through experience. They give you cannon fodder. As soon as you get to the top, once you get to the top, you start fighting the better guys. And with Philip Holliday, they gave him easy opponents. Easier. They gave him people that they knew that he could beat. And that's how you build up a boxer, because in the beginning, if you give him a tough opponent, he might be discouraged and stop training and who knows what. So I remember we went one time, it was somewhere in a colored neighborhood close to Soweto, and I saw Nas fight. And it's the first time in my life I saw a boxer fighting backwards, and he threw a left hook and he knocked this guy out, and a lot of courage. And the colored community loved him because he had a lot of heart and a great boxer. Him and I recently connected, but he's one of the most humble guys. He doesn't like to go on social media and that. But with him, I learned a lot. The way he carried himself as a fighter, very calm. He would never get mad. And in the most, how can I say, when people were aggressive around him, he was very calm. He actually, one time I was sparring with him, as little as he was, he hit me in the kidneys. And I'll never forget, Quest, I was peeing blood for 2 days. I used to get in the boxers and I used to spar with them, with the Van Winkle brothers. And there was another boxer from the police that was really good, Hein van Bosch. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He became a Springbok. He did some pro boxing, but it didn't go well for him. But Nas, he went to a good camp. I left. I came to the States. He joined Harold Volbrach's gym and ended up fighting for Harold. And I had already come to the States.
I'm often wondering about you bouncers, because it's not only the Ayers who's trying to act out stupidly. I mean, sometimes you get like a drunk woman, or may I rather say a crazy woman. I recall in Pretoria West, in my time in the police, we called it the Wild West for bloody reasons too. And there was this Curve Hotel there. Can't remember the name, might be the president or something like that. But you do know if you're called out there, you don't go alone. You never go one vehicle, because these people gang up against you. But right next to it was like a flats. And so there's a disturbance there. So we went there as a flying squad. And we meet this woman who must have been 600 pounds. That's a groot tannie. Sy het arms soos 'n beer, nee. And I thought to myself, I will never be able to arrest this woman. And she's quite loud, and now I'm trying to be reasonable. Tannie, asseblief, hou op, blah, blah, blah. En sy kyk van, sy sê, boetie, ek wil my prokureur bel. And I say, okay, you have it right, please call your attorney, perhaps he can talk sense into you, because I'm going to tear gas you. And really, you should stop behaving like this. And so she turns around, she takes that telephone, and it's one of these old size telephones, and she hits me with that thing right against my head. Now, I saw stars for several minutes. I mean, I wouldn't know where I was. It was actually one hell of a... I even had to x-ray my head to see if my skull was broken, but anyway, we got her under control after a while, which was one hell of a fight. And then getting her into the squad car was even worse, because she didn't want to get in. But we got her in, and she you know what, it's actually funny. The next day, when she was released, she brought us some cook sisters. to make up, she was just like that. But now my question I want to ask you after now telling my own sad story is, can you really get yourself just to hit that woman? Or what do you do? What do you do with her?
Well, so it's a funny thing you mentioned that to me, because in South Africa, I told you before I went into the army, I worked at the Hallaby House. It's a well-known place in Bloem. And like I told you, my stepmother had left for Greece, and I lived with a friend of mine, and I had to do something before I went into the army. A lesbian girl came one day, and she went into the men's bathroom because there was a fight with her girlfriend, and some guy had walked into the into the men's bathroom. So I went to go and pull her out, but I didn't know that she was a lesbian. And she comes and she grabs me, and I punched her. And as she was going down, I actually it was a reflex. I threw a roundhouse kick. It was like my go-to move, punch and round kick. I felt bad later, but the owner said to me, man, and not only the owner, the girls that saw this thing happen, they said to me, if she wants to behave like a man, she needs to feel it like a man. And, I felt bad. And then there was one time in Miami, there was this Spanish girl. She was Venezuelan, and she was drunk. And I didn't want to let her in the club. And I said, listen, I can't let you come in the club. You're very drunk. And I have some police friends with Miami Police Department that they happened to walk beat at the club where I was working. They used to walk around, and they used to be in the vicinity of the clubs, and they used to see everything. And Chris, as I look away, she gives me a Thai varam klap, like you say in Afrikaans. But yes, I was so mad, right? And I grabbed her, and at the same time, the sergeant, the policeman on duty, came and grabbed her and cuffed her right away. And he called, and they came and took her away. And I said, man. So the sergeant says to me, man, you should have punched her. I said, no, Sergeant, she's a woman. He said, no, you should punch her. You have a right to defend yourself. I couldn't believe it. As the man of the law, he was telling me that I had the right to defend myself. But, of course, the girl was petite. She was drunk. She gave me a varam klap unexpectedly. But the other thing that happened in South Africa, I don't know, is it because I realized like the girl was very like butchy, and I said, yes, if I don't defend myself against this girl, it's going to be a fist fight. I had to do something. But it's a tough call, It's not something I would normally do. No, I would try to subdue them. But that in South Africa, that happened to me many years ago, was instinct. And yeah, it's like you say, it's very difficult, a very difficult situation. But I'm going to tell you, talking about Pretoria West. So there was a boxing gym that Wamheni used to send me to go and learn how to hold, these pads that boxers hit. I was learning how to be a boxer, cornerman for boxing matches. You must know him. He's a legend in South African boxing. I don't know if he passed away. Uncle Billy Lotter. You ever remember Billy Lotter? Anyway, so he had a gym now, and you had to go to Pretoria West for this. His gym was above a garage, but there was no sign that said boxing or anything like that. You went up these stairs, and one day I'm on my way to Pretoria West, and these Afrikaans guys come in a bakkie, and they those Pretoria West people are really rough and onbeskof, like we say in Afrikaans. And I happen to look at them and I say, "What kyk jy?" And this and this and this, that. And the next thing I know, they're following me. And they followed me all the way to the gym. So I was very smart. I got out of the car and I ran up the stairs, and Uncle Billy Lotter was there. He says, "What's going on?" I said, "No, I got chased. I'm getting chased by these guys." And these guys came, of course, it was the funniest, right? The guys ran straight into the boxing gym. We closed the door and we blitzed them. Imagine now, the guys got the biggest surprise of their life, because they didn't realize they came into a boxing gym. Some guys were eating the bags, others were eating the mitts, and all those guys were my friend. So as they ran in, Uncle Billy closed the door and we started mooring these guys. The guys were mooring in with a man. They've never got such a hiding in their life. That was really a funny story. I'll never forget that.
I can tell you two funny stories which I've heard, and I'm speaking on the corrections. And please, guys, if I'm wrong, I apologize in advance. The first one is about the late Jimmy Abbott. Now, anybody knows Jimmy Abbott, and he was actually a good boxer. As far as I know, he was a good fighter. But he's a big man. And he would be in trouble with the police every now and then before he turned his life around and he became a child of God. And I believe a minister, he became a reverend at the end. But anyway, Jimmy Abbott had a tough life when he grew up. He was definitely from a tough environment. And so the local police station now and then had to go and arrest old Jimmy. And they soon realized it takes about 5 constables to subdue him. And then they had a plan. They would send the smallest, most cutest policewoman there. And she would knock on the door, standing there with her handbag and everything in uniform lock. And Jimmy would arrive and says to him, "You're under arrest." And he's like, "Okay." And he says, "And you're coming to the police station with me now?" Yes, he's coming. But he wouldn't fit in a vehicle. So he would follow with his Mercedes, his old mates that he had. That's the one story I've heard. I don't know if it's true, but I believe it can be true. And then there was Kali Knutse. Now, Kali Knutse is still alive, and Kali, if you're listening, please come and speak to us at Legacy. But I've heard this story when he was still at the dock unit. Now, Kali Knutse was a fantastic policeman, let me tell you that, besides being a very good boxer. But he had, of course, a swagger about him, he was Kali. And I'm told the story by several people that he went on a complaint as well. Uka in Pretoria West. I think at that stage, the dark unit and flying squad was stationed at Marabastad, which is the most dreadful place there, right next to the zoo in the middle of Pretoria. But that's before me. I moved to the new flying squad headquarters in Pretoria West when I arrived. But a year or two before, they were still at Marabastad. And these were tough guys, they were really something else. And so Kali arrived at this complaint, and he knocks on the door, and when the door opens, this guy just floored him. He just knocked him out. Not out of his, unconscious, but onder his pet uit, nee. It took him several seconds to eat back. So I don't know if this is true or not, but I can believe that a bouncer can be attacked from behind. That's a point I'm trying to make here. Does that often happen, that, somebody chip away in the front and the next moment somebody beats you with a bar stool from the rear end?
Yeah, Chris. The guys, a lot of guys, they come with an entourage or groups, and they, if they for some reason don't like you, they find a way to distract you. But working in the club scene, you always have backup. You have I normally used to work with guys that did MMA. They were MMA professional fighters. And I mean, you can't get better than that, especially now with MMA. The guys are well-rounded. I was probably the oldest guy. I was in charge of the group. And, man, we took care of these guys in a very short time. And, the idea was not to have a boxing match with these guys, get the thing done, kick the guy out, push him out, because, eventually the place where you work, the club gets a bad reputation if there's too many fights. And you want to do it in a way that it doesn't look like it's a bloodbath. You want to get the person out of there, get him under control and take him out. Yeah, so that happens. I've seen some really bad fights where I remember one time 2 rival gangs they came to the club where I work, and they came and they took their personal fight in our club, and we couldn't keep them under control, and chairs went flying, tables went flying, bottles went flying. And then they went next door. It's an Irish bar, and they took it there. And then the police had to call backup and everything. And eventually they arrested all of these guys. But they were too many for us. It was two Latino gangs. And they took out knives and everything, So luckily, we didn't get hurt or anything like that.
You said to me last that it can take about 3 months for you to get a NAVIC. And I suppose unfit people like ourselves, is, may I say, ate too much potatoes and things like that along the way, to get just the basics that we can defend ourselves. Can you tell me something about this? Because I really believe it is of crucial importance in South Africa and anywhere, actually, these days, that you know at least a little bit of skills. Because you never know when some drug addict or some idiot is going to try and abuse you.
Yeah, so of course, like I said to you before in the previous interview we had, if you take up a martial art like karate or judo and you go through the belt and the ranking, it's like forever. Now, in a real fight, this is what I believe. You need what works, the techniques that work. And I really believe you can take somebody off the street, provided the guy puts the time into it. I would say in 3 months, you can get him to learn the fundamentals of how to throw a basic punch, kick, elbow strike. And the person has to obviously work on drills with that. Now, like if I was to teach you, I'm not going to teach you karate to defend yourself, because it has a lot of techniques that for me it's not functional. It's not going to work. It's fancy. All that fancy stuff, you got to weed it out. Now, I was talking to you about Krav Maga. Krav Maga is nothing new. The Israelis, what they did, they went and they borrowed the best techniques from Muay Thai, judo, wrestling, and they called it Krav Maga. What they're doing is nothing new. That's what I teach them, but I don't call it Krav Maga. So basically, you take the best effective techniques from different disciplines and you put them together, and it's things that going to work. There's techniques that I could teach an older lady that's 70 or 80 years old, where she can defend herself. I was teaching, people say to me, okay, but like a woman now, she's not very strong. If somebody grabs you around the neck, for example, I said, you don't even have to wrestle the guy. All you do is you take your finger and you stick it in the person's Adam's apple, by the throat, and you see how quickly they release you. Like pressure points. But, a real fight is different. There's adrenaline. There's that adrenaline rush. Is that, like I told you, fight or flight? A lot of times you're not going to think about those things unless you practice those things like religiously. It has to be drill after drill after drill. So it's not. So basically, if somebody comes to me and I teach them a course on the weekend, and they learn the stuff that I taught them that weekend, if they do not continue training in that, they're not going to be able to apply that. Now, there's a European guy that's from Belgium. I'll send you a link on his videos. He does a reality-based fighting, and I think it's one of the most effective. And he's done a lot of the stuff that better than the people in Krav Maga, and a lot of the ideas that he has, ideas that I have too. And it's like, it teaches you, like if somebody throws a blow at you, a punch or kick, how to move at a 45-degree angle and hit someone from a blind side, very much like boxing. But again, it's things that, and it's vital points, hitting the person at certain vital points, stuff that you got to drill. It's not, oh, I learned this stuff in 3 months, okay, I'm good now. No, it's things that you got to continuously do, or else it's just like shooting a pistol. If you don't fire all the time, you're not going to be a good shot. It's the same thing with that. But again, maximum amount of damage in a minimum amount of time. Because I would say this, if you feel your life is threatened, whether it's your wife or you, and you get threatened and you punch a guy very hard or you kick him or whatever it is, I would say to you, run. It might sound like, no, you're not a coward, you're smart. You hit and you run. Don't stay there and get into a boxing match. We're talking about survival over here. I would say that to an old lady too. Make a noise,
Can I ask you, is it possible actually to teach these things online? Because you see so many of people doing it these days online, and I don't know if they are for real or they, there's a bunch of chances.
Yeah, of course, that's a good question. So that'll be good for somebody like me who already has a martial arts background and knows more or less what the guy's talking about. So if I see something online, like an idea or technique, I'll understand it better than the average person on the street who doesn't have the martial arts background, because I know how the techniques work and I will know if it's effective or not. It's like, these days people go on YouTube, and okay, YouTube is a good educational platform, but there's nothing like doing it in real, applying it in real. You know what I mean? So yes and no, depending on how much knowledge you have about the fighting art. And like I said to you, man, it takes in a fight there's a lot of factors. Remember, if you get into a fight, you have to take into consideration, what clothing are you wearing? Are you wearing tight jeans? Will you be able to kick? Are you obstructed by a table, a chair? You can use different things as a weapon, your keys, your car keys as a weapon, a bottle, or you know, all that kind of stuff. You have to, how much space do you have? How much room? You have to look at all that stuff.
Well, you know, we spoke to a few of the special forces people here on legacy, and they're always very popular for obvious reasons. And one of the questions we're always being asked, the South African chaps anyway, is, do you have any martial arts training? And most of them say to me, yes, we do, but it's easier just to shoot somebody. Which of course is true. I mean, if you're in a bush war or you're somewhere, you're not gonna, you know, it's not James Bond. It's, you know, it's easier just to snipe a guy with a silenced weapon behind his head and just move past him and to try and subdue him. It's just the nature of war. But I do remember you were actually involved in something where your people were actually in some kind of a bar and then you got attacked. Would you care to tell me about that? Without mentioning names now, we married people,
Yes.
you know, we want. Yeah.
So of course, I'll mention one person's name. I think he won't mind, but I had a friend growing up in my city in Bloemfontein. He eventually became the 2 IC or 5 Recce. His name's he's well known in South Africa. His name is Andre Lombard. He has a church where he goes and he rescues these girls that are taken as sex slaves. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Very good friend of mine. I call him Lomis. He came from a very messed up family. His dad was a drinker. His dad was the ex-paratrooper, and growing up as a young boy, he was under my wing. And I went into the SAP, and when I came out, the next thing I knew, he was a parabat. He was a corporal in parachute battalion. So one night, him and I were, this is when I was in the SAP, we were at a bar, and there were some guys from 5 Recce at the same bar, mostly black operators, with the captain. Their captain was a white guy. He actually happened to be in 4 Recce. He was an officer, and he happens to be a friend of some of my friends. Anyway, these guys were in this club, and they said they want to find some girls, you know, some colored girls, because, you know, those years of apartheid, you know. So I said to them, okay, I know of a place where I can take you guys. And I went, and they were some of them were ex-Zimbabwean and Portuguese from Mozambique and Angola. And I remember the one sergeant even gave me, as a gift, he gave me his hat from 5 Recce. So we went to this bar in the colored area. Me and Lomis, we took them, and we started drinking. And I said to them, you know, it's time to go. And one of the sergeant, the Portuguese guy, he was flirting with somebody's girlfriend there. And Lomi says to me, hey, I think we should go here because I see a lot of guys are congregating and they're looking at us and this and that. So when we came downstairs, Quest, that very same sergeant, he got stabbed in the throat here, and the blood just came out, and we were surrounded by about 20 guys with knives. And I remember the Zimbabwean, one of the Zimbabweans, he was like 6'4", he was a big guy. When he saw the guy got stabbed, he went crazy and apeshit, and the guys were coming in there, and the knife went through his hand, and he didn't care, and he was grabbing and kicking, and I kicked the one guy too in the stomach with a front kick, and I knocked him over, and it was a big fight, you know. And how we didn't get seriously hurt or killed that night, I don't know. But we fought our way out, you know, and we had some cuts on our arms and that, especially those guys. I got my bucky, and I told him jump on, and then this guy was missing, the Zimbabwean, and I said to Lomis, where's this guy? And he had run into the bush, and he was busy kicking this guy's head in, one of the guys. And I had to get him off this guy because he was going to kill him. And right opposite us was a police station. And I was, you know, I was a cop at the time, and here I am, I'm supposed to uphold the law. I convinced him to get off the guy. We got on, and these guys who had come to Bloemfontein to do Halo, high altitude, low opening. And I remember their captain saying to me, make sure that these guys come back safe and there's no problems. And I felt really bad, Chris, because I heard the next day these guys were thrown. They were all thrown off the Halo course. And I think the captain was the Murin with me. But, you know, it was, everything happened so fast. I have vivid memories of it. But, you know, when you fight for survival, sometimes you don't remember everything. It was just like everything happened so fast. And these guys, you know, they were very close to each other because they had been on many, they'd been together on many operations in the bush. And especially when the one guy got stabbed, I remember the other guy took his t-shirt off and applied pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. You know, like when somebody's attacking one of your brothers, you go ballistic. You don't care for your own life. And you could see that these guys were very tight-knit. But it was, how can I say, I think we had the size advantage over these guys, mostly colored guys we were fighting. Once we started kicking them and this and that, and we grabbed some bottles, we eat them with bottles, they kind of dispersed, and I managed to get the bucky and get these guys there, and we had the guy apply pressure on his neck, and we took him to the military hospital there at Tempe. But it was a scary moment. Whenever I speak to Lomis, you know, him and I are on WhatsApp, we always talk about that. And the funny thing is, him and I had lost contact because, you know, I came to America and he eventually became a Pathfinder, and from Pathfinders, he went to infantry school, became an officer, and he ended up at Palabora, and he became the 2IC. And he was a very young officer there as a major.
Well, he's most welcome to come and talk to us because, you know, this thing of white slavery or human trafficking is actually a very big deal to me. You know, there's this old stupid joke in South Africa. I'm not even sure I can tell it here, but I'll do it. And if people complain, please, it's just a joke. And I have to do it in Afrikaans because that's exactly how I heard the joke first. But it seems like this ouderling oom arrived at one of his men's clubs, you know, we're at Pretoria. And I recall with the Boerebeleg of 1990-91, there were a lot of dance chicks at these escort houses. I think Pretoria Central detectives were chasing them around for about 6 months afterwards. And so anyway, he goes into this and he meets this young girl and he recognizes her as one of his friend's daughter. And so she tells him a sad story of life, of being abused, and she's got a young child and the husband's a drunk and I don't know what. And then, so he said to her, ja nee, dis goed so, ons kan môre daaroor praat, maar die oom gaan jou nou eers lekker spyker vanaand. And you know, we can laugh about that, but in fact, it's not funny. A lot of these women, and I see it here in Phuket as well, is actually slaves. You know, they brought to a place with a job offer, they find themselves in these horrible circumstances, and men just abuse them. I understand the going rate in Phuket is $50. It's about 1,000 baht or 500 rands. With that, you can do it for all night, whatever you want. Now, I'm a happily married man. There's no way in the world I will get involved with those things, and we will not. Let me tell you, there will not be any such things in our place, our hotel, ever. I will not allow it. So he's most welcome to come and talk to us. It is something I feel strong about. I have a friend called Lucy, who features in many, many of my books, her story. And, you know, it's that old song, isn't it? How many times can a man walk away? How many times can you turn a blind eye and still be called a man? You can't. And the answer is not in the wind, my friends. The answer is doing something about it. But now I want to know, if you're in a competition, do you actually study your opponent, or do you even know the guy? Might you be good friends in other circumstances, or do you go in blindly there when you have to fight during a competition?
Yeah, of course. That all depends what kind of competition. So when I did when I did karate, which was point competition, the idea there is like that video that you saw of me in Las Vegas. I actually got disqualified there, believe it or not, for excessive contact, because any contact to the face has to be touch, light contact or just skin touch, like they say. To the body, you can punch or kick hard. But so let's say basically you with a group of guys, 20 or 30 competitors, and depending on which order you're going to fight, by studying the other guys, the way they're fighting the other guys, you can more or less tell what their strengths and weaknesses are. You know, so I always used to take notes. If I wasn't like in the first called up in the first few fights, I looked at the others, and you can see when others are warming up, what techniques they're doing and what do they favor. But you know, I'm going to be honest with you, all of that goes through the window when you're fighting. You can, I don't care how much notes, it's just you fight on instinct, adrenaline, and strangely enough, the stuff works for you. You put it together, and it's, like I said to you, constant drills. Now with kickboxing, you could study an opponent, you could watch previous fights with him, if you had video footage and that. But I tell you, I remember going into kickboxing events. Now, it's just like boxing. They'll have, let's say, a card, and there's 7 fights for that night. And let me tell you, it's a shitty feeling. You're sitting there in the dressing room, and let's say you fight number 4 or 5 on the card, or maybe the main event. And there's a lot of things going through your mind. You start self-doubting yourself, and you get tired, you wait, you're warming up, you cool down, and you say, shit, man, I should have been playing volleyball or ping pong, something a lot easier. Why am I doing this? And you get into the ring, and once the bell rings and you start fighting, actually the crowd goes on mute. You can't hear anything. And once the first punches are exchanged, you get the hang of it, and you're fighting, and you like say, shit, man, it wasn't so bad. I remember when I went with the Springbok team to Budapest, I ended up getting the bronze medal for South Africa. I was the only one who won the medal at that event. I fought a guy that was, I don't know if you remember, during the war in Yugoslavia, the Civil War, there was a guy that was the most wanted criminal in Europe called Arkan. He had a group called the Tigers. So one of his main guys, his name, he actually happened to be the bodyguard of Montenegro, Samir Usanic. He got gunned down in downtown Montenegro many years ago. Many years later, I found out. But anyway, I remember fighting him. The guy was big. He was 6'4". I lost to him in overtime, and he had closed my eye with a punch. I couldn't see anything. I go to my corner, and I said to the guys, I said, listen, there's something in my eye. Take the shit out of my eye. They say, no, there's nothing. It's your eyes being closed. You know, I had a broken nose. I broke his ribs. But it was a hell of a fight. The guys actually, when I felt like I really got blitzed. But when I got out of the ring, the guy said, man, we're so proud of you. And you fought a very good fight, because the guy ended up winning the gold medal. And he came to me at the hotel, and he says, man, you were the toughest guy that I ever fought in this tournament, because he says the guy that I fought for the final was a German. He says, I knocked him out. And this guy had like a knockout thing. And he was also in the Olympic Yugoslavian boxing team. So he had a little bit more experience than I had. But, you know, that's where I learned a lot about myself, who I really am, if I could take a punch or not. I wasn't maybe the best technician, but I put in a fight. And that goes back to, I think, the days of SAI. We had this boxing competition at Lens, Lenasia. I learned from an Afrikaans guy called Austin. He had Western Transvaal colors in boxing. And I ended up fighting him too. And the only reason I beat him is because he lacked stamina. Otherwise, he would have kicked my ass if he was fitter. But, you know, when you're in a real situation and you get hit, 2 things go in your mind. You say, oh, shit, am I going to continue doing this? I'm getting hurt. Or you're going to stick with the pain and put up a fight. So that's where I learned fighting is mental. It's not physical. It's how strong you are mentally. Because, you know, the first reaction for anyone, I don't care what it is, when somebody punches you hard, is, oh, fuck, this guy just punched me hard. He rocked me. Now, it's up to you how you stay in the game. I'll give you an example. I was fighting in Cape Town for the Springbok trials. And there was a South African famous heavyweight, who committed suicide. He was a Christian too. He fought in K1 in Japan, called Mike Bernardo. You must have heard of him. Big guy. He was a heavyweight. I was a light heavyweight, and I fought a guy that was from his same school. And Mike was yelling at this guy because he was losing to me on points. And I remember at one point, I kicked him and he went against the ropes, but he used the momentum of the ropes and he came forward and he hit me with a right hand on the chin. And Chris, that's the hardest I've ever been punched in my life. It felt like somebody hit me with a sledgehammer. But mentally, I knew that in the round, I more or less had like 30 seconds left to survive. So what I did is I avoided him for the remainder of the round, and the bell rang and I won the fight. And I remember getting out of the ring. I went to the doctor and I said, Doc, man, I have a headache. I have a severe headache. He said, no. You have a concussion. That's what you have. And I remember boarding the plane from Cape Town to Johannesburg. And next to me sat a Kenyan doctor. He was from Kenya. And I kept on asking the air hostess for aspirin. He says to me, no, man, that's not going to help. He says, you have a concussion. You got to lay off. You got to, because what happens is when you get hit, your brain is like in a membrane and it gets bruised. And that was the first time I'd ever got concussion. That was the qualifier for the event in Budapest. But you always learn about yourself when you're in a difficult situation. And I think you would agree with me, whether it's military or fighting. It's either you're going to back up or go ahead. So the fight game, and I like going back to what I was saying to you, the way I grew up in South Africa, really tough with Afrikaans guys and learning to fight and play rugby, and the whole environment of the army and the police shapes the person. You might not think that, but all those factors are going to shape you. So yeah, I would say, when it comes to fighting and all that stuff, I would say 99% might sound strange to you, but it's mental. The physical is the least important. It's the mental, how mentally strong you are. I remember there were guys, man, our intake in SAI, I don't know for what reason, the guys that came in the July intake to SAI, it looked like they were all a bunch of street fighters, especially Delta Company. There's a funny story I'm going to tell you about them. So you had these mostly Afrikaans guys that worked in the mines, Carltonville, those areas. A lot of them didn't have matric and they came from broken homes and they knew how to fight. And let me tell you something. I feel sorry for any unit that came into contact with any guys from SAI at that particular intake. And I'm going to tell you a story why. In, I think it was 1986, we were on the border. And these Delta Company guys were at how they say in Afrikaans, I don't know how they say in English, a deurgangskamp. And the Parabats were there. It was their Echo Company Omana. So they were almost about to fly out and they had a bad reputation, Echo Company Parabats that year. And our Delta guys were there. And there's a song, I don't know if you remember it, it used by Mr. called Broken Wing. If you go on YouTube, you can find the song. I think some guys from SAI, there was a fence that divided the Parabat and the SAI guys. Now, keep in mind, the Parabats in Bloemfontein used to bully, I think, 1SSB. They have a long history. And even guys from one side. And they used to steal berets to polish their boots. Now, SAI was the wrong guys to mess with, the guys from the Kalahari. And you know what? I love the bats. Like I said to you in the previous episode, that was my dream to become Parabat. Chris, I heard these guys were taunting them. Yeah, 1 a.m., 12 o'clock at night. The bats climbed over the fence. And some of the Delta guys had got a tip off the Delta Company that the bats are coming for them. And what these SAI guys are, they stayed in the tent and they set traps. There by the entrance of the tent, they put a cable. So when these guys came in, they would trip. And of course, they blitzed these guys. And a lot of them ended up in one mill. And I remember our captain came, he gave us orders and he says, please, you guys go to Ondangwa. We don't want to have the repeat of Delta Company. It got so bad, of course, that one guy, I knew this guy, his name was Duplessis. He was a MAGA from Delta. He actually had live ammunition. He started shooting in the air, and thank God nobody got killed. And the MPs had to come there and sort these guys out. It was bad. There were casualties on both sides, injuries and everything. No, those guys, let me tell you, those guys from Delta company, our Delta company, there were some tough guys in the army, man, really tough guys. And if we ever had to be, I know would have never happened, had to go hand-to-hand combat with the enemy, they would get blixamed. There was no way about that. But like those special forces guys said, yes, of course, the best way is to shoot someone. Why not? Why get to the point where you have to, fight?
I have to laugh about this because I will remind everybody listening here. Think of a day when you were wearing your first step outs and your beret and your uniform, and you were so proud, man. You were such pride, you're about 2 inches taller and your chest is sticking out. And I fully understand that. But let me ask you, Paul, how did it happen that you started coaching the US team?
Yeah, so Chris, like I told you in the beginning, I belong to a big federation that's Japan-based, and I obviously over the years I became a US citizen. I won the US nationals in our organization multiple times, and I paid my dues and I moved up in the rank and everything. And eventually, because of my competition record and being a US citizen, I became a coach. And I took the team. Remember, I told you I took them to Indonesia in 2016. Funny enough, of course, when I was in Indonesia, I don't know if you know, it was under the Dutch for 300 years. It was a Dutch colony. It was under the Japanese too, but it had been under the Dutch. And they use a lot of Dutch or Afrikaans words in their vocabulary. They say stuff like pisang, they say tante, worm. And I found that, like I was listening to conversation, like a handbag, they'll say tas. So I took a team over there, and we did really well. I also participated myself. I got a second place at the Worlds there. I lost in the final fight, I think by half a point. And because of political stuff in like any organization, there's a lot of politics. I stepped away. I used to be on the board. I stepped back from that. I'm still in a coaching position. Karate has become, or martial arts for the most part, has become very political, like everything has become today. And I want to step away from the political. I want to do it because I enjoy it,
Is it possible that the student can surprise you by being just exceedingly good or hardworking or just...
Good question, Chris. So I was talking with some high-ranking karate people the other day. We were talking about giving somebody a rank. Now, I have these 2 kids that I've been training since the age of, they started me when they were 6 and they're 16. Now, these 2 kids are not athletically gifted. They can't even touch their knees. That's how inflexible they are. But let me tell you something. What I like the most about them, their parents are wealthy people. The mom is a celebrity down here. She used to be an anchor woman for a TV station. She actually went to South Africa to cover Mandela's funeral. But going back to the kids now, very respectful. The most respectful kids I've ever seen, straight A students in school. You know what? Every year I see a little bit of progress in them. I've graded them to brown belt. It's been, you count the years, right? From 6 to 16. Most schools would give a black belt just like that, and over years become very commercialized. They give belts away easy. What I like the most about them is that they grind. When I teach them private lessons, now these days they go down, they do their 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups. And for me, what is the most important thing in life, and I'm sure you'll agree with me and the listeners, is the effort that somebody puts into it. Like I said to you, and I'm sure you've seen it too, you see a lot of talented people just waste their talent. They know they're the most talented, but they don't put the hard work. And these particular boys, next year I'm thinking of testing them for black belts, and they're going to be worthy black belts because together with that rank, it's not about how good you can fight. It's about your human character too, as a person. I always tell my students, winning a gold medal or that is not the most important thing to me. It's the way you treat others and the respect that you have for others. because that's what the martial art philosophy is about. You know, these days, the morals in humans, we don't have that anymore. The respect, and especially amongst young people, I come across a lot of young people. They don't have that respect like we used to have. I remember if I did something back in the day and I did something wrong, and I soos ons sê in Afrikaans, jy het droog gemaak. I used to feel ashamed because I used to go red in my face. I used to say, sorry, oom, sorry, Tannie, or something. And, you know, my dad was very old school. He was from Greece, and I told you the story. He would move me with a fucking garden hose pipe across the back if there was no two ways about it. My stepmother, a high-heel shoe on the head. And like you said, it wasn't child abuse or anything. My dad even told our Afrikaans neighbor, listen, if my son steps out of line, moor him. Seriously. And I had no problem with that. You know, when we were kids, you know, we were naughty. We used to do things. We used to steal people's fruit, jump over the fence, you know, like not the kind of stuff the kids do today, you know, go and shoot people up, or, you know, the stuff that we used to do as kids, just being naughty, stoutgat, like they say.
But that is being part of childhood, man, and that is what we miss today. But I want to ask you a question quickly. When you are graded for black belt the first time, I've heard that the JKA guys, I understand it's the Japanese ones in karate, they also have another word that I mentioned. I can't remember. It starts with an S.
Shotokan. Shotokan.
Shotokan. Forgive my lack of knowledge.
No, that's good. JKA, yeah.
Yeah, so they said to me, they would go actually to Japan to compete for the black belt, and they would take on 2 or 3 people at the same time, full contact. And I can believe it, because this girl came back and the eye was shot. How do you call it? Hit on the eye and shot. Is that true? Is that how you grade somebody for black belt? Do you need to have that really? I mean, it's a big deal to be a black belt, isn't it?
Yeah, so Chris, it's a very good question, an important one, and something I've talked about with my karate peers. So unfortunately, it's not that hard anymore. I remember going back, you know, South Africa has a very, very long karate history. I don't know how familiar you are with it. We had guys like Stan Schmidt. You must have heard from the JKA. He was one of the first Westerners, South Africans, a guy called James Rousseau. He brought a style called Gojuru. You had Len Barnes from Cape Town that brought Kyokushin. Now, those guys were the pioneers of South African karate, and many more, you know. And when they brought it to South Africa, they brought a Japanese mentality together with them back to South Africa, which didn't really, it did suit, it did not suit. Now, South Africans by nature were tough people. The Afrikaners, I mean, you can't find a tougher white man than an Afrikaner, I can tell you that much. A Boer, with those big knuckles and forearms and that. So they took on karate very well. The South Africans took on karate very well, but they also, the South Africans who went to Japan implemented the same militaristic Japanese doctrine of teaching karate. So it was rough back in the day. So when you saw a black belt, you heard of a guy back in the 70s, and you said, that guy just came back from Japan, he's a black belt. Of course, I can tell you this, that guy was a badass in the true sense of the word. Nowadays, every Johnny has a black belt, and it doesn't carry the same value anymore, the black belt. I'm sorry to say that. They do basic techniques, they line you up, you do basics, you do kata, your form. I don't know if you've seen those forms that they do, and they'll have you what they do, kumite, free fighting, but it's very controlled. Back in the day when I did karate, it was very rough. And when you passed your black belt exam, they say normally exams were normally on a Saturday. The Monday, it was called initiation. And you would fight all the guys in your dojo full contact for 3 minutes. So you'd fight a fresh guy, 3 minutes, and these guys would moor you. You would come there and you would be bruised, and you would have a broken nose, a black eye. And yes, and you know, when the South Africans went to Japan, believe it or not, the Japanese were afraid of the South Africans because physically, South Africans are big guys. And I'm going to tell you a story. There's a famous South African karate guy that's still living in South Africa now. His name is Norman Robinson. I don't know if you heard of him. His grandfather was a professor in judo. They call him Professor Robinson. And there was a Japanese guy called Yano. His nickname was the Animal. And he was small. And Norman, in his youth, you know, like 6'4", strong guy. He had a judo background before he even started karate. So they got into close quarter fight, and the Japanese guy made a big mistake by grabbing Norman. He didn't know that Norman had a judo background. Norman picked him up, took his gi, his karate uniform, and choked him. It took like 15 people to pull Norman off Yano. His face had gone purple. And whenever the Japanese heard the South Africans are coming to train or grade in the dojo, they made sure they stayed away. And the British know about the South Africans, everybody. If you mention to any Japanese the word the name Stan Schmidt or the days of Keith Geyer and those guys, they know. You know, they were generations ahead of me, a few ahead of me, and those were the people who inspired me. They were our like chief instructors at the time. And it was hard, Quest. It was really hard. Nowadays, karate is not that way. And I try to teach that same way, but, you know, I end up losing clients like that. And I had to water down my karate, sadly. So it's not what it used to be. I wish those days would come back. Even in the US, servicemen who were in the US Army or based in Okinawa, guys like Chuck Norris that was stationed in Korea, he learned Tang Soo Do, and he came to California. He opened a studio and then eventually got into movies with Bruce Lee. And the early American pioneers that brought karate to the US, tough guys, that strong tournaments, even those years was really, really tough. Now it's become very watered down. It's commercialized. It's like you see signs, they have these kids sign a contract. In 1 year, you can get a black belt, but the kids are useless, man. Totally useless. I don't teach that way. I had this one girl. Her name is Catherine. She's in university now. She's studying aeronautical science. And she came to me when she was 4, and I graded her to black belt when she was 14. So 10 years later, had she been in another school, she would have been a black belt when she was 5. So they give you a false sense of hope. It's all about the money, the dollars. And you see these senseis, a lot of American senseis, groot boepens, big stomach, with a belt with so many stripes and decorations, and master of disaster diploma, and the guy can't fight himself out of a brown paper bag. Ridiculous, totally ridiculous.
So it seems to be important, but I think you have something in common with Chuck Norris, by the way. He was also a policeman. He was a US Air Force policeman, and then sadly he lost a brother at Quezon in Vietnam, for those who don't know. But let me ask you, how good is Mr. Putin, the Russian president? Because he sports also quite a few black belts, and there's people who say, no, it's just given to him. He doesn't look to me like that. He looks to me like a guy who can actually fight if he needs to.
No, he's a really good, he's a judoka. I think his rank, his official rank with the Kodokan in Japan is a 4th or 5th dan, but he got an honorary rank because of who he is, and that as a 9th dan, but officially he's like a 5th dan. But I knew before this war broke out in Ukraine and that, you know, they removed his rank with the International Judo Federation because of this Ukrainian war. But I know that on previous trips that he went to Japan, I've seen clips of him where he actually gets in a gi and he rolls with people. He does judo and he doesn't care to mix it up. He's better than this guy, the movie actor who I think is really a fake, Steven Seagal. Because I met a guy in California when I was doing kickboxing, a guy who's an absolute legend, a guy called Gene LaBelle. If you go and look up Gene LaBelle, he was a grappler. He did freestyle wrestling. And there's a story that I was not supposed to share, but I've told a few people, and I'm going to share this now because Gene LaBelle's dead. Where Steven Seagal said to him, you cannot choke me out. And let me tell you, he must have choked out Steven Seagal like 5 times, and every time Steven Seagal was tapping. So his art, Seagal's art was Aikido. He lived in Japan, speaks fluent Japanese and that, but the guy is just too full of himself. You know, there was a fight with this Brazilian guy, won a fight in the UFC, Anderson Silva. I don't know if you saw that fight. He's a black guy, very good fighter. He kicked the guy with a front kick, kicked him in the chin, knocked the guy out. And Steven Seagal says, "Oh, you know what? I told him to do that. That's bullshit, just to give himself publicity." He's not a very, the true martial art guys who know him, he's not a very well-liked guy, you know?
There was this Jean-Claude Van Damme. Do I say his name correct? And Bloodsport, I think, that movie. Now I understand that is Hollywood. Cook, I understand that. But there were some doubts about his fighting skills as well. Any views on this fellow?
Yeah, so of course, actually, to tell you something, I actually competed in an event where he was there before he became famous. And he was decent. He wasn't like you see in the movies, you know. I mean, what makes him look good is that extreme flexibility that he has, the kicks that he does. And, you know, he had presence, the screen presence. You got to have screen presence. He was European. He had that. He's from Belgium. He speaks Flemish too, which is like Afrikaans, I think. I've spoken to Flemish people from Belgium. They speak Vlaams. And charismatic, you know, he came to California, met this girl that was a bodybuilding champion. Her name is Gladys Portuguese, that he's back with her again. It was his first wife. He married 7 times. But anyway, she got him into the movies. He started off with a low-budget movie. I don't know if you saw it when you were young. It was called No Retreat, No Surrender. I don't know if you remember that movie. That was the way he was a bad guy in the movie. And I think from there, you know, and Bloodsport, me and my chummies in South Africa before I went to the military, we must have seen it about 10 times. Probably watched it more than 10 times. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, look, he was a movie star. He didn't have much of a competition track. Now, whether he could apply it in the real life, I don't see why not. But he wasn't like, wow, like, you know.
What about Bruce Lee?
Yeah. So of course, I trained with a guy in California. He's actually a legend in kickboxing. And I had my doubts about Bruce Lee because he was a small guy. I don't know if you know, he weighed about 50 kilos. And the guy I trained with in California, I'll send you later on WhatsApp, Benny the Jet Equitas. He's a very well-known martial artist in America and around the world. He knew Bruce Lee personally. And I said to him, Sensei, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, was Bruce Lee real? Was he for real? Was he really that good? Even though Bruce Lee had no track record of him fighting anyway. He says to me, yes. He says, Paul, the guy was tremendous. He says, Bruce Lee had that, I don't know if you heard about that 3-inch punch. And he used to have guys hold a phone book, a Los Angeles phone book. And he would go, just 3 punches. They would knock these big guys way back. There's a story of him, Bruce Lee kicking, he told the actor Ryan O'Neal to hold a kicking shield. Bruce Lee kicked him with a side kick. From the shallow end, he lifted him up in the air and the guy landed in the deep end of the pool with a kicking shield. So, yeah, he was amazing because for a guy, think about it, a guy who could, they weighed 50 kilos. And with that velocity that he hit you, could move a big force. You know, I guess it's mass and velocity, that connection. It's incredible. A guy that small that could generate so much power, and that's because you know it's physics. You know, mass, velocity, and all of that. And it was a person that was, you know, Bruce Lee was one of those guys. They come one in a million years. And thanks to him, karate schools, I remember in my time, you remember the movie quest, everybody knows it from our generation, Enter the Dragon. When that movie came out, I remember the lines were so long and I couldn't watch it because there was the age restriction, it was 2 to 18. I later got it on, remember the old projectors with the reels? That's where I saw Enter the Dragon for this time because I was not allowed to go watch it. But that movie helped martial arts schools all over the world generate a lot of income with students. It was the Bruce Lee era. And thanks to him, martial arts schools grew. And then you had a guy like Chuck Norris, then Van Damme also, and then you had Seagal. But the guy who's responsible for the growth of martial arts, I don't care what anybody says, is Bruce Lee. He's hands down like, the man.
I heard somewhere, and don't laugh at me if I'm wrong, but when you punch, you're supposed to twist your fist, something like this. They say you generate more power. I was thinking of that when you spoke of Bruce Lee. Is that true?
Yeah, so of course, to understand a punch, right, it's a very interesting topic. I had written a little thesis on it, so people don't understand this. And you look at a guy like Mike Tyson, right? Your punch it's not in your arm. It starts from the floor. You're pushing, your energy comes from the floor. It's not complicated, but it's easy to understand. When you punch, it starts from your ankle. It goes to your knee, to your hip, the rotation of your hip, your elbow, and the twist of the wrist. So all of those come together as one. And it's your body mass also. Now, a lot of guys don't know how to punch good. And a good puncher is normally, if you look at a boxer, the way you shift your weight is by keeping your body weight center. A lot of guys, they punch wrong. What they do is when they punch, they lean forward too much and their body mass shoots behind them. So the idea is to lift your heel, raise your heel. When you throw that, your strongest punch in boxing or martial arts is your right cross. If you're a righty or a lefty, is by keeping your elbow tucked in and throwing it as straight as possible and raising your heel. So you're on the ball of your foot when you've executed the punch. But a lot of guys, what they do is they lean forward and their energy, their power goes backwards instead of forward. So it's not just a lekker rechterhand, you have to know how to throw it. It's like, those fights back in the bars in South Africa, you could see the guy, yes, he pulls a punch back there, and you could see it coming all the way. They used to telegraph the punch, but a good fighter doesn't telegraph the punch. He hides it. That elbow is nice, close to the body, straight right, down the middle, down the pipe, like they say in boxing. So there's a science to fighting. It's not like, hey, I'm just going to punch. You have to know what how the technique works. You have to break it down and study it.
So what was the secret of Bruce Lee and his 3-inch punch? I mean, I've seen this. I mean, it looks unreal.
So of course, I think it's all that power comes from that hip, from your hip, that hip thrust there. It's your hips. I mean, look at sports. Everything in sports involves your core, how strong your core is. Look at a baseball player, a cricket player, a cricket player who is hitting with a bat. You'll notice that he's using his core and his hips when he's hitting the ball. Same thing with punching. Is that, the use of your core and your hips that you engage in that. And Bruce Lee was he was phenomenal. I mean, the guy trained like a savage. That's all he did. And I think the way he died was a lack of sleep. He didn't get enough sleep, not the other rumors that the Japanese mafia killed him or the Chinese mafia. I think his heart couldn't take this guy. I mean, this is what I heard. He used to sit up at night and write philosophy and study technique, and he would get 2 hours of sleep every day. And I think that lifestyle caught up to him. He died at a very young age. He died at the age of 32, the 20th of July, 1973. And then his son, Brandon, you remember Brandon? He died on a movie set where they used live ammunition instead of instead of using a blank, they used live ammunition. I mean, how crazy was that?
Yeah, it's very sad. I think he got shot dead. It's really sad.
Yes.
I remember in my time that the ninja movies came out and they were like very, very popular. There was a book written called Ninja or something. Eric Lostbader, or very thick book. I actually read the thing. Understood very little of it. So these ninjas, it seems to me, and I'm talking of as a leek, I know nothing about them. They seem to operate in a different way. Is that true, or is it part legend?
No. So of course it's real in medieval Japan. Think of the ninjas like as the special forces. They were secret assassins. They had those stars like the shuriken, and they were trained in different combat. So I think it's true. I don't know about there's a Western Jiu-Jitsu teacher. I don't know if he's still alive. I used to read articles on him in Black Belt magazine. Stephen K. Hayes, that was his name. He was the highest Western graded guy in Jiu-Jitsu. But I didn't get into Jiu-Jitsu. I just, I read a lot about it.
What do you do to earn the title of sensei? It doesn't come just because you're a black belt. You have to be an instructor, a master. Am I correct?
Yeah, so strictly speaking, a sensei should be at the level of sandan. Sandan in Japanese, which translates to a third dan. And you have to go, you have to know your forms. You have to be technically sound with your basic techniques. You have to show good fighting spirit. But like I said, Chris, sadly, all of that has been lost through the years now, and it's become commercialized. And today you have the Olympic style point fighting, where these guys are very athletic. I must say this, and they're phenomenal athletes. They're Olympic style athletes. But I tell you something, you get a guy there in Pretoria from a bar, a Lekker Afrikaans guy, and he gives him one punch, he's going to floor the karate guy. I'm going to tell you the honest truth, because this new generation of fighters, they're more about show than anything. And the problem with karate is nowadays, if you don't do contact work in the dojo and you don't know what it feels like to get punched, then when you go in the real world and you get punched, it's a big surprise to you. If you ask me now in a street fight, who's going to do well? A boxer will do well, because when a boxer trains, he trains for real. So when he's doing, like you say, Afrikaans, when he's doing sparring, skarm, he's either putting on the headgear or not putting the headgear. They're hitting each other for real. So when he gets hit in the street or that, he's not surprised. Nothing new to him. But a karate guy, when you're stopping the punch there, is like, I mean, you cannot toughen up your jaw. I understand that. But after a few hits, like I was saying, a boxer, he's used to that punches to the face, to the body, so he's conditioned. So he's not surprised when he gets hit. He's been there before. But a lot of karate guys don't train that way. They made it a lot softer. Now, a wrestler, I never used to think much of wrestling until the UFC came along. I mean, you look at these guys, they're beasts, man, these wrestlers. And for some reason, the wrestlers, I never followed wrestling in South Africa except for I met Jan Wilkins when I was a kid. He was a legend. You remember him? So I used to watch what they call Rofstoy in South Africa. Now, the Greco-Roman wrestling in America is a big thing. They teach that in the high schools and college level, and they go to the Olympics, of course. But, Chris, those guys' work ethic, the wrestlers, as far as conditioning and fitness and that physicality where you're grabbing a guy and you're going man to man and you're lifting him up and you suplex him, and that makes you tough. That makes you really tough. And a lot of them made the transition, American wrestlers, to the UFC. And it was really easy for them because in wrestling, they teach you to cut weight. And that's a big thing, learning how to cut weight, to lose weight, to prepare yourself for a fight. And that's not easy, losing weight, because you lose strength and energy. But these guys know how to do it. And I think that work ethic of a wrestler, all they had to learn, for the wrestlers to learn when they came to the UFC, was learn how to punch and kick. And they made that transition very easily. And for them, the work ethic was the easiest because they're hardworking athletes. And if you see, I guarantee you, if you take anyone to a wrestling workout, they're going to throw up. They cannot make it. I've seen these guys. They are absolute beasts. But again, in a fight, you're in a bar, it'll be very stupid for you to go on your knees. The wrestlers do what they call the single leg. They go down, they shoot to one knee. You can blow your knee out doing that. Or depending on the situation, they could pick you up, lift you, and bang you to the floor. Once they got you on the floor, they can, what they call ground and pound. So karate, unfortunately, coming back to karate, and like the old school karate I learned in South Africa, it's over the years has become very watered down. It's something taught to the kids now as far as discipline and focus. I would tell you it's a good thing for discipline and focus. There is a lot of issues in America with kids getting hurt in a competition. There's lawsuits. I'm sure you've heard it in America. I remember when my first street fight I got in America, somebody told me they're going to sue me. I said, sue me for what? I couldn't understand that. Yeah, if you get into a fight, they lawsuit. In South Africa, there was no lawsuits. You got into a street fight, you clubbed each other, and you end up drinking a beer with that guy, maybe. So society in general has become very softwares over the years, and it's become sadly you think with the technological advances we've made that we would be better, but society has gone backwards. And I'm sure you've seen it.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. I recall Jan Wilkins and Tarzan Jacobs. I think he was a policeman too. Looked like Tarzan himself, and the volstrijskick and all those things they had out here. We've been talking more than 2 hours. So I need to ask you here at the end, does it really matter if somebody is listening here and they want to take up the sport of karate or self-defense? Does it really matter what they take or to which sensei they go or which dojo? Is that important, or should they just go? What's your advice for us?
Yeah, so of course that's a good question. Yes, I think they should do their research on who the instructor is, and I think they should go and visit their academy or dojo and look how they train and see if that particular sensei satisfies their needs. And depends what the person is looking for. The person might want it as a form of self-defense or fitness. Again, it's every individual has different needs.
If you could have your life over again, would you do the same?
Yes, because I have no regrets. And you know what? I tell you something, right? I've been living in America for 30 years, right? And I miss South Africa. And I was born in the best country in the world, the best country ever. And I'm very thankful to the South African people, especially my Afrikaans friends and my surroundings, because I wouldn't be the person I am. I'm going to tell you, I went through some tough times in America when the economy hit us in 2009. And, if I wasn't mentally so strong, I don't know how I would have done it. It's South Africa makes you a man. Of course, I just want to show you this. This book was given to me by our friend Shane Willard 2 years ago. And he wrote me a message. He says, Paul, you've never lived till you have almost died. And he says, and for those, we fight for it. Life has a flavor. The protected will never know. And he put Shane. Then he says, because remember I told you I had that parachute accident. He says, Paul, I hope you enjoy the read, and I hope your injury is minor and it heals quickly. And this was his message to me inside the book. Great book. He didn't tell me to promote him, but he's just a friend of mine. I thought this is a brilliant book that he has written.
Yeah, he's always welcome here. If it wasn't for Shane, we would not be speaking to you. So of course, I would always say to you guys, go and read Shane's book. It's the only book about the South African Police Special Task Force out there. You really have to do it. I'll put the links in here. It's not a problem at all. But I wish to thank you, Paul. Thank you for coming back. I think you're going to be a regular here on the show. If people want to contact you, I suppose we can leave a link or something here. I think there's a lot of people who remember you, if you don't mind that. And to the rest of you guys, come and talk to me. Don't let your stories die with you, man. You're welcome here. It's a conversation. You've seen this now. This was exactly a conversation, not an interrogation. There's nothing to worry about. Come and speak to us. And until we meet again, God bless you all.